Okay, the Commandant of the Army War College, Lieutenant General Srinivas, Commandants of the MCT and Infantry School who are present with us physically, Commandants of CAT establishments who are online, General Officers, officers from Army Headquarters, commands, field formations, as also CAT establishments across the country, distinguished speakers and delegates, esteemed veterans, the think tanks that are plugged in. To everybody, a very good morning. And it's a great pleasure, as always, to be here at the Army War College, especially for the 23rd Doctrine and Strategy Seminar, DSS. Now, the Indian Army is understandably proud of its mastery over the traditional domains, as also its time-tested proficiencies in the fundamentals of war fighting and soldiering. Fire, maneuver, shooting, fieldcraft, our skills in mechanized warfare, mountain warfare, gunnery, combat engineering, digital communications, air defense, logistic support, etc., etc. And though over the last 2 to 3 years, we have been speaking of doctrinal evolution, in order to keep pace with the emerging challenges, I must emphasize yet again, and I've said this many times in the past, none of this is at the cost of the basics. Our basic proficiencies must be honed, but we have no choice to keep pace with the emerging challenges. We also cannot be unaware of the fact that huge, in fact, humongous change is sweeping the geopolitical and strategic military domains globally. So change is upon us. We have to be conscious about it. We are resolved, therefore, to keep abreast with, even hopefully stay ahead of, trends in doctrinal and technological evolution, while staying rooted to the fundamentals of combat, as I said. Must also be conscious of the fact, as I keep saying, that we have a neighbor on our northern borders who is now a superpower. Dealing with this superpower, everything will have to change. Metrics of our statecraft, the metrics of our diplomacy, the way we look at war fighting, because that superpower, I've said times without number, is on a economic zoom and military gallop. It is transiting rapidly to the digital era. So in this stated endeavor of doctrinal evolution and keeping pace with evolving change, the Army War College, and particularly the DSS, have played a stellar role. The DSS has been the fount of a lot of good that has happened to thought and ideation in the Indian Army. If I may remind you, this forum has helped us to explore the disruptive technologies that we must embrace. It was General Srinivas, the FOS, and the Army War College that steered the effort. It is here that we debated how multi-domain operations must evolve in the Indian context. At other forums, we have analyzed the technology boom around AI and the future of power, and the dynamics about the rise of China as the signature geopolitical challenge of our times. In the aftermath of these seminars, we prepared roadmaps and have pursued resolute implementation. Some of the disruptive technologies that we debated here just a year ago will enter our inventories very soon. So not only superior ideation, but also resolute follow-up is what we are committed to. And may I say in all humility that we are making some very good progress. It is in that spirit that the current edition of the DSS will look at our transition to digital era combat or digital era warfare. While the specialists in the galaxy of speakers to follow, as the Commandant told us, will educate us on the intricacies and deeper nuances of digital combat, let me attempt to just initiate the dialogue. So the principal driver for the transition to digital era combat is, of course, the onset of the digital age, in which digital natives, the millennials, the young people, digital natives, and digital organizations will thrive naturally. So organizations like Google and Amazon that were born digital, they have known no other kind of existence they will thrive naturally. But the more traditional centers of excellence face extinction if they do not restructure. Look at the story of Apple. Apple, I'm told, was born as just another gadget company which successfully sold a large number of computers through physical stores. With the onset of the digital world, since Apple did not change and did not restructure itself for the digital world, it almost died. It was then resurrected and transformed by Steve Jobs into the biggest purveyor of digital goods, powered by global digital platforms, seamlessly through identical digital and offline stores, transforming it in the process to one of the most successful, highly valued, most admired, and most profitable companies, but only when it embraced digital era attributes and proficiencies. The same goes for Microsoft, the company that ruled the world in the 1990s, but was almost written off as dead in the early 21st century because, drunk in its own success, it did not read the tea leaves right, ignored both the internet and the mobile phone, the most significant inventions in recent times, till it was too late. Its stock price plummeted, market shares started sliding, and analysts and employees in Microsoft started deserting it in droves, until it got a new guru. The current CEO, Satya Nadella, and Microsoft underwent a second birth as a leader and purveyor of cloud-based software and digital technologies driven by data, AI, and the general openness of the digital world. In its second digital birth, Microsoft is back to where it was, the most valuable company in the world. So the choices before traditional centers of operational excellence like the Indian Army too are stark. Either we continue to polish our traditional wares, or we embrace the digital world and its products with imagination and innovation. The latter, in my view, will be the wise way forward. Also, perhaps in a decade from now, because a younger lot of officers, JCOs and Jawans are naturally, intrinsically digital, they will feel more at home and will be a more natural fit in a digital army than one that is steeped in the traditional world. So if the hardware, software, and the human capital come together digitally, see what will become of this Indian army. Do remember that in Iraq and Syria, modern Western militaries were upstaged in terms of social media leveraging and in other digital domains by organizations like the ISIS, whose cadres were naturally digital, even though they were wedded to a 7th century Islamist ideology. As the world around us, therefore, business, commerce, consumption, science, energy, and transportation turn digital, what could we do by way of leveraging digital power to sharpen our operational posture and poise? That is the key question. That is the key question that we must debate and investigate. And here I may just offer a few thoughts for your very kind consideration. In future combat, in my view, the salience of software may be just as significant as the volume and potency in hardware. The old belief that software merely supports hardware must be inverted. Future militaries will be distinguished by the quality of their software, especially, as we know, artificial intelligence and the technologies that have grown around artificial intelligence. The future may not be about the best tanks, artillery, and other platforms alone. I say alone. It may well be about investments, proficiencies in the softer layers of hard power. We may like to consider imaginative investments in developing the smartest and most adaptive algorithms, the best combat apps, and cloud technologies. If I may remind you, the very recent Operation Guardian of the Walls, the Israeli offensive into the Hamas, may have just about set the tone and tenor. So what did the Israelis do there? They created, based on AI, the super cognitive digital platform, which enabled it to do three things. Through facial recognition techniques, the first few days of the campaign, They took out the top 6 to 7 Hamas commanders. So the chief of the Gaza Brigade commander, the chief of their technologies division, the chief of their strategic projects, they were taken out. The leadership was gone using facial recognition. The point I'm making is that all these technologies, the digital world is not something about the future. It is happening. Then they used big data fusion techniques to identify in the Hamas tunnel network the points of vulnerability and struck them with precision, rendering that very famous network almost unusable. They also developed a software called Alchemist, I'm told, based on tabs, which was given to these tank commanders, which alerted them some seconds before missiles were fired. So the casualties in Op Guardian of the Walls on part of the Israelis this time was just one. Should we continue to pour money into newer versions of old military platforms, a better tank, a better aircraft carrier, or should we invest in a new generation of digital battle networks of sensors and shooters that rapidly accelerate the process of detecting, targeting, and striking threats, faster and more effective kill chains? So in one sense, the battle is between platforms and kill chains. Legacy, or shall I say, constantly modernizing legacy platforms or faster and more efficient kill chains. We could adapt and succeed, but the scale of change required is enormous. And this is what the seminar must debate. Traditional models of military power are being disrupted by the advent of digital technologies in the way the blockbuster business model of video rentals was uprooted amidst the rise of Amazon and Netflix. Amazon and Netflix uprooted Blockbuster. A military made up of large, expensive, heavily manned, and hard to replace systems may not survive on future battlefields, where swarms of intelligent machines will deliver violence at greater volume and velocities than ever before. Success, and as the Commandant said, perhaps Idlib in Armenia, Azerbaijan was just the beginning. Success will require a new kind of military, one built around large numbers of small, inexpensive, and highly autonomous systems. So legacy platforms versus autonomy. To build such a military, more than anything else, we would need a new kind of human capital. So we will have to look at new talent pipelines. Global militaries the world over are doing it. They are looking at new career paths for space, cyber, and this kind of specialists. New kind of human capital, imagination, and resolve, because change is always difficult. To build such a military, we will need to stop treating data like engine exhaust, a useless byproduct. We will need to instead treat data like oil, harness and leverage it to power the autonomous and intelligent military systems. These autonomous military systems that we talk about, if you don't leverage data, they're useless. You don't have the capacity to leverage data. So I spoke about data initially, that are critical to dominance in future warfare. As access to space gets cheaper, and this is one domain I would seriously urge all of you to study because it is here and now. And not only the science of space, but the geopolitics of space. Why China is investing in outer space? Because they say that you cannot get any military superiority on Earth unless you have hegemony in space. These things, and they will impact our fundamental tactics, our fundamental fire and maneuvers. It is not some lofty thing. It will impact us on a day-to-day basis. Isr targeting. It is said that satellites will soon become like mobile phones, cheap and replaceable. So digital militaries will need to invest in space and quantum sensors. Quantum sensors in some time from now will be able to detect disruptions in the environment. So as the air around aircraft changes or the water around submarines changes, quantum sensors will be able to detect movement. So the combination of thousands of satellites that provide an unblinking eye over the adversary and quantum sensors will give digital militaries an unrivaled edge in ISR. Autonomous platforms, space, quantum technologies. It will give you an unrivaled edge in ISR. New developments are power generation and storage. The way you generate and store power, batteries or whatever, as also hypersonic propulsion will allow autonomous systems to travel further and faster than ever before. The rate of fire or how fast weapons shoot will accelerate rapidly thanks to new technologies like lasers, high-powered microwaves, and other directed energy weapons. And in all these arenas, we have begun. We may not have attained excellence, but somewhere in the midstream, we have already reached somewhere. So the time between the detection of adversary targets by spotter drones and their being wiped out by precision fires will be in minutes, if not seconds. These will be the characteristics of digital militaries. Digital militaries, therefore, will have an edge not only in ISR, but also in movement and firepower. Autonomous militaries will need less fuel and perhaps no food. The logistics constraints will ease. 3D printing will reduce the need for vast, risky, and expensive military logistic networks by enabling the production of complicated goods at the point of demand quickly, cheaply, and easily. That is why we are trying to make a big push in 3D printing with the MCME. We're trying to at least get to the basics. The Commandant tells me that at the moment 3D printing per capita is very expensive, but we are still going into it because in the longer term, I've told you what the benefits of 3D printing will be. Digital technologies will push communication functions to the edge of the networks. And the Commandant of MCT, when he speaks, he'll perhaps explain it better. Every autonomous system will be able to process and make sense of the information it gathers on its own without relying on a command hub. Decentralized networks. This will enable the creation of radically distributed networks that are resilient and reconfigurable, very flexible. In my assessment, all these digital technologies that I spoke of would displace decades old, even centuries old assumptions of how militaries operate, concepts of war fighting. Not be easy, it will take decades to come. But if we acknowledge that the need is there, we must start now. Militaries that embrace and adapt to these technologies, digital militaries, will dominate those that do not, traditional militaries. So that is the simple conclusion. The challenge before the Indian Army, or the options before the Indian Army, perhaps are threefold. We cannot be Amazon and Google. We are not digitally born in terms of human capital, in terms of structures, traditional. So we cannot be Amazon and Google. But question is, can we at least be restructured Microsoft and Apple that I spoke about? Legacy, or these, not I wouldn't say legacy, but modern platforms smartly combined with autonomous systems and everything else that I spoke about. Lasers, microwaves, space, quantum. And it's just not technology. I've tried to tell you what the deduction or the military output of each technology will be. So that is what we can aspire for. We certainly should not remain unstructured and concentrate merely on better platforms and legacy concepts. Because if we do that, then we will undoubtedly, in my view, decay and atrophy. So with these words and thoughts, I rest my case. Their validity or otherwise will be determined by the proceedings of the sessions that follow. I wish the seminar the very best and look forward to the frank airing of views, fresh thoughts, and deep perspectives that cut through the cliches and the jargon that normally characterizes these discussions. So thank you.
Expressing my gratitude to the Commandant of the Army War College, Lieutenant General V.S. Srinivas, for inviting me to present to you today. I would also like to record my thanks to Captain Akhilesh Menon, the Indian Defence Attaché to Australia, for reaching out to me in the first instance, and Colonel Virik for interfacing with me during the preparatory phase for the seminar. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you, uniformed members of the Indian Army and of the Indian Armed Forces. We remain indebted to you for your service that you provide to the country and to its security. So thank you. Now, my mandate for this presentation is to brief you on some of the macro trends that are informing and co-constituting the digital information age. So let me begin by observing that it has been said that the Stone Age did not come to an end due to the lack of stones. And in the same way, I also argue that the industrial age will not come to an end with the demise of industry. And this is what makes the matter on hand a complex one, which often leads us to underestimate its significance and not pay attention to it in as careful detail as may be warranted. Now, to appreciate the significance of the larger, that is to say, the macro trends of the age that we currently find ourselves in, it is worth first reminding ourselves that we, that is to say, humanity, have been, over history, experiencing what some, with the benefit of hindsight, refer to as strategic shocks, or alternatively, discontinuities. Indeed, the nature of these shocks or discontinuities are not simply strategic, but more importantly, they're transformational in nature. Often, this is not recognizable or appreciated, but the facts are undeniable. Let me explain. In the first instance, one profound strategic shock was delivered by Copernicus. And how so? His work in the field of astronomy transformed how we thought about the heavens. His heliocentric model displaced the then geocentric model of the cosmos. From then on, the Copernican model has dominated our understanding of the cosmos, our orientation to it, which has impacted and continues to impact how we today think about the solar system and has its concomitant impact on the development of GPS space missions and other space-related activities. Another equally transformational strategic shock was delivered by Darwin and his theory of evolution and natural selection. That too radically changed or transformed how we thought about our, that is to say, the human position in the natural order of things. We are no longer the privileged beings that we have thought ourselves as being. Rather, we now recognize that we are just another species with, as, if you'd forgive the expression as the Chinese say, with special characteristics, among a plethora of species that make up the natural world. Notably, this evolutionary view of humans and of the wider natural world has allowed us to develop, among other things, the science of genetics, and regrettably, to weaponize some of the outcomes leading to the potential for waging biological warfare. A third example is the work of Sigmund Freud, who showed us that despite our urge to seek knowledge, we humans know very little about how our minds work and the nuances that are involved in how our cognitive capabilities function. Needless to say, this too, in part, has been weaponized, and we are now thinking of, among other things, the cognitive battle space. Notice that each of these, what I refer to as strategic transformational events, not only impacted the human development trajectory, they also transformed how we see and understand ourselves, and more importantly, how we do things, which includes, among other things, how we wage war. And now, I argue that we are going through an equally profound strategic transformational phase, or what some have referred to as the fourth discontinuity. Like the three previous events that I referred to, while we may not be able to immediately recognize it or its effects, we would be committing a strategic analytical error to underestimate the import and significance of what is happening around us, and yes, also to us. The transformative effect of what is happening around us is so profound that it is changing, as Michael Dillon, a political philosopher who I studied under, stated, among other things, the very military phenomenality of human civilization. And with that, welcome to the digital information age. So what are the areas where the effects of the digital information age has had its impact and is continuing to have its impact? As you can see here, it has had and is continuing to have a significant impact on a number of fields. The point to note here is that not only has this impact been in terms of the use of technology, but it has also, just as Claude Shannon had predicted, had a conceptual impact, or to put it differently, the fundamental concepts of cybernetics and information theory have informed and have found applications in various fields. Indeed, it has also enabled us to think of society in socio-technical terms, which indicates the degree and depth to which digital information technologies and the ways of thinking engendered by them have infused themselves or have permeated into our very practice of everyday life. In addition to that, the digital information impact has also spawned newer areas of research and development, cases in point being social computing, web science, the emergence of online web-centric communities and the subcultures that they in turn spawn, among others. And there's good reason for this. In 1991, Mark Weiser, who was a computer scientist and the chief technologist at Xerox PARC, made an observation. He said, "The most profound technologies are those that are disappearing. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they're indistinguishable from it." Note the year, 1991. And keeping in mind that, underwritten by, as we've seen, Moore's law, digital information technologies are indeed being integrated into, as Mark Weiser put it, the very fabric of everyday life. True, we've not yet reached a point where such technologies are fully indistinguishable, especially in terms of hardware, but certainly in terms of software, we are fast approaching the point where we are taking software technologies for granted. They are, for the most part, fading into the background. As this chart depicts, this trend is reflected in the development of intelligent logistics paradigms in surveillance, security, transport, document management sectors, in geolocation, telelocation, and a variety of other fields and domains. I will also draw your attention to the fact that just as the impact of this trend is visible or discernible in the civilian space, it is equally valid in the strategic security and defense sector. And one can, with a bit of reflection, understand why this is so and what this portends for the future, which we'll briefly address shortly. And what is the nature of the relationship that we're having with these trends? Or to put the question differently, what are the means by which we're interfacing with these trends? Well, again, keeping in mind the imperative of Moore's law, we are seeing our interface devices shrinking, and much of the back-end systems fading into the background. The average common person is not really concerned about the infrastructure in his or her daily life. Our attention remains focused at the application layer. How can we do things that we want to do? And what can we use to do those things? So, for example, how can we monitor things? How can we collaborate with each other, cutting across distance and time? How can we develop and disseminate or share content? How can we communicate between ourselves better? But behind all this are the platforms that enable these activities, to which we pay little or no attention. And at an even lower level lies the core infrastructure that is supporting all this. This base infrastructure is now decisively digital information in nature, thus lending credence to the assertion of us living in the digital information age. I would argue that this is now an irreversible trend. And now let's briefly cast an eye on the strategic military space. Like every other domain, this space has also been impacted by the digital information age and is subject to the trends that it is setting. Very briefly, recall all the talk about force transformation? Well, yes, it was underwritten by those who could see the trends being engendered by the digital information age. And like in every other domain, the strategic military domain's evolution in the context of the digital information age also rests, for the most part, on the foundations of information processing and storage. Recall here that one of the first things I pointed out was that the trend that the digital information age had triggered for the storing of data in digital forms as opposed to analog. Well, as you can see, this digitization of information is allowed for increasingly sophisticated command and control systems, which allows for enhanced decision-making. It has allowed for the heightening of mobility. These in turn have enabled agility of command and control functions, allowed for the development and institution of what some refer to as hyper-surveillance systems, from the largest resolutions to the most granular. And these have collectively allowed for increasing the efficiency of the sensor and the shooter and of enhancing the lethality of the latter. And like in other domains, the digital information age has also triggered not simply the transformation of the battle space, it has altered our cognito-perceptual architectures with which we understand the battle space and its needs and requirements. And this has in some quarters is leading to a concerted effort to transform the very nature of the armed force, which is a subject that I'm sure all of you are very familiar with. And so here's a snapshot of the interaction between warfare and technology, but more specifically within the digital information age context. Notice from 1990 onwards, roughly, when we were in the initial stages of the second phase of the digital information age, there was a global reassessment of the strategic military posture. In short, questions began to be asked. What is the impact that emerging digital information technologies are having on the military? These discussions were often embedded within discussions about, RMA and so on and so forth. This was followed by the network-centric warfare paradigm. Notice, you can see the impact of the digital information age in the very formulation of the paradigm, network-centric. So in those 2 decades, between 1990 and 2010, the trend in strategic military establishment globally, some quicker than in others, was to think in terms of networks instead of platforms, to think in terms of adapting to evolving and changing ecosystems, and to think of threats as being network phenomena rather than being singular. Equally and simultaneously, we observed a trend to focus on precision management, the precision engagement, development of smart or intelligent logistics, on developing ways and means to adopt full dimensional postures and to think in terms of multi-domain contexts. Notice also that this was taking place in keeping with the larger trends that the digital information age was triggering. And this brings us to the current situation. Again, like in the 1990s, we are now in the midst of another critical reassessment of strategic military conditions. And like in the 1990s, this is also due to the developments and trends of the digital information age. At a macro level, we are now talking about the emergence of what I have in some of my writings elsewhere referred to as intelligent battle space. Correlate this to the computational world or planet paradigm that I was referring to. The reference to intelligence here is first and foremost grounded on the emergent Internet of Things and at a more foundational level to artificial intelligence. The trend that we can see going forward under the umbrella of the digital information age is that we will see an increased emphasis on the institution and weaponization of cyber-physical systems, systems that connect the world to our computational systems. Intimately related to this, we will see the rise of an exploitation of ambient intelligence systems. Given that we expect a plateauing of Moore's law, we will see attempts to break through its limitations, and that pathway likely resides in quantum computing, biocomputing systems. An ancillary development, particularly of a consequence of developments in biocomputing, would be the rise of soft robotics. That is to say, robots that are made of increasingly biological materials rather than simply silicon, metals, plastics as they are today. And above all, we will continue to see efforts being made to widen the narrow AI paradigm that we are working and using today. In other words, the nature of our current AI systems is very functionally specific. This refers to the narrowness of AI. This will change, and we will see efforts being directed to widen this narrow AI and to develop what I call narrow general AI systems. Remember, general AI is the holy grail. It is what we imagine artificial intelligence approximating human intelligence to be. Outcome? Well, we will be increasingly interfacing war with and through technological means, much more so than what we are doing today. Already some military establishments in the world are experimenting with what they refer to as global information dominance experiments. Note the reference to global sensor networks, AI and cloud computing systems. These are terms that we've come across earlier. Also, note also the ambition to see in advance and the trend to create a decision space. And this is happening as we speak. And so, what does the picture look like if we put everything together? Classed under the general categories of people, technologies, processes, and organizations, the emergent trends look something like this. These trends are interconnected, but that does not mean that they will unfold in sync with each other. We will see some develop quicker than others. We will see some stagnate well ahead of others. We may see some giving rise to possibilities that are not listed here or indeed have not yet been thought of. And to put all this in the context of threats, strategic military considerations, and to correlate all this to emergent areas of science and technology, the composite picture may look something like this. Notice that each of entries under the emergent S&T areas column is in some way or the other underwritten by developments in the digital information space. Equally notice that each of the emergent threats are somehow enabled by trends in the digital information space. And finally, notice the entries under the emergent strategic military considerations are equally underwritten by trends that are underway in the digital information space. And so, what about the future? Like I mentioned previously, there'll be an increased emphasis on pushing the biocomputing frontiers. One of the key areas in this regard is neuromorphic computing engineering, which is basically to learn and apply the lessons that biology teaches us, the key being low cost and high functionality, a model that our brain quite literally employs. Increasingly, our most powerful computing systems, albeit very sophisticated, is magnitude less in capability than not simply the human brain, but also brains of other evolved animals. So you can imagine what the aim of this trend is and the attraction that it has for researchers in the years to come. A more general space which will see a very high level of focus and activity is in the development of natural computing systems. While neuromorphic computing systems are focused on the brain, the natural computing system paradigm looks to biology in general. Indeed, it considers nature to be a computational system that, among other things, processes information, which it does smartly, efficiently, and with elegance. It is also speculated, and it is this speculation that underlies this trend to focus on natural computing systems, that we may be able to evade the problem posed by the diminution of Moore's law. The objective, to develop computational systems that can adapt, and most importantly, above all, that can reason. And finally, as you know, quantum computing is exploitation of the collective properties of quantum states, such as superposition, entanglement, to perform computation. But here's the very interesting thing about quantum computing. Theoretically, any computational problem that can be solved by a classical computer can also be solved by a quantum computer. Conversely, any problem that can be solved by a quantum computer can be solved by a classical computer, at least in principle, given enough time. This means quantum computers remain true to the Church-Turing thesis. Then the question arises, why do we spend so much energy and effort and time to investigate quantum computing? Well, note I said, any problem that can be solved by a quantum computer can also be solved by a classical computer, given enough time. The key words are given enough time. That means it is believed, and it remains to be proved, though increasingly it's tending to be so, that quantum computers may be able to quickly solve certain problems that no classical computer could solve in any feasible amount of time. Again, keyword is feasible. This is known as quantum supremacy. And if this is proven true, and likely it will, then the impact will be felt almost across all domains of human knowledge. And this accounts for the increasing trend to invest in time, energy. Arguably, natural computing and quantum computing are the frontiers of the digital information age. And before I end, some couple of cautionary notes. If I've sounded enthusiastic at times during this presentation, then that's because I am enthusiastic about the emerging trends of the digital information age. Why enthusiastic? Because this is a time like no other. We are in a phase where our world, and we along with it, are transforming into something that is quite radically different than what we've been used to. But there's also a need to remain grounded. This rendition of the K wave explains why. We need to always bear in mind that the trends that I have highlighted thus far go through phases marked by prosperity, recession, depression, and improvement. Indeed, the field of AI, since about the 1960s till about early 1990s, went through the recession and depression phase. This was known as winter of AI. Today, it's in the improvement phase. Similarly, each of the individual trends of the digital information age that we have looked at today may be expected to go through the same. But that should not convey the impression that the trends and related technologies are at a dead end. Well, some may be, but as I mentioned a number of times already, the macro trend of the digital information age is now irreversible. And this highlights what I've just mentioned about, although just represented differently. But notice something interesting about this chart. First, almost all technologies listed on this chart are within the innovation and inflated expectation phases. Second, almost all of them are within the 2 to 5 to 10-year time frame. And third, there are no technologies listed that are noted as being likely candidates to be obsolete before plateauing. And this indicates the direction that the digital information age is taking us towards. And finally, in conclusion, if all this is indicative of the macro trends of the digital information age, then where are we headed? Short answer, future unknown. But what is certain is that we are on a hell of a ride, even though it may not seem so to many of us today as we go about our everyday lives. But you know what is interesting about unknown futures? It presents us with an opportunity. It allows us, as Admiral Zabrowski had observed, to not simply anticipate the future, but more importantly, to create it. This is our opportunity. But exploiting that opportunity also comes with a prerequisite. And I think Donald Rumsfeld, regardless for all the reservations that people may have about him, put it quite succinctly when he observed. And yes, his observation was made in the context of impact of the digital information age and warfare. We need to change how we think. This is the most crucial point of all, changing how we think. If there's one strategic macro trend the digital information age is exhibiting, it is this. It is inviting us. Indeed, it is compelling us to change how we think. Those who can effect this change will be able to leverage the benefits of the digital information age. Those who cannot will be left behind. Thank you very much for your attention. It has been an honor and a pleasure for me to address you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So in the next 40-45 minutes, I shall be covering this topic on digital era combat, what's the criticality and its silence in the current context. So that will be my topic for taking it forward. So in the due course of time, I would be covering three important topics, which is of changing geopolitical landscape and nature of conflict, how it's shifting and what is happening across the world, and towards achieving a larger objective, that platform-centric to network-centric warfare, and how technologies in unified networks can actually help achieving the larger objective. And towards the end, we'll have some recommendations on this. So I think I just wanted to lay down the foundation to all of you that for ICT modernization in defense, there are three strong pillars, which is one is technology, and second is unification, and an investment towards achieving this thought process. All three pillars are very, very critical, and I'll be definitely touching on these aspects as we going forward into the discussions. So first and foremost thing is this, how this changing geopolitical landscape and nature of conflicts actually bringing large changes, and how do we get prepared for these changes. This is going to be, let me touch upon briefly on this topic. So when we look back, I think we find that wars have been fought ever since the tribals are born, and it has graduated from, you can see, from the tribal wars to states fighting and nations entering into war, where you find arrows and lances and swords, or gave away to rifles, and later to you can find guns, tanks, and rifleries, and nuclear weapons are coming in the picture. I think two devastating world wars have actually been fought, causing immense, I would say, miseries to the humankind. So what is emerging here is that in future, space will emerge as the region of conflict. That's something that you could see that it's happening, and this is going to be an interesting area to look into. Space will be an area of conflict for most of these cause of these wars. So the nature of the conflict and shape of the global geopolitical landscape is being permanently changed with this. And with the advent of these experimental technologies, which is digital technologies, the fears and fog of war and quickly and act decisively will be important, remains as an important focus for going forward. I think with this, with the increasing digital world, the capture of data and not the territory, and the compromise of critical information and an infrastructure and not the state borders are the new security challenges that we are going to foresee in time to come. So this is going to be an important area to focus. So needless to say that in future you'll find supercomputing, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and are going to be ingredient besides cyber weapons. That's going to be an area which is going to be drones, ballistic missiles, and space-based satellites, and in addition to the existing weapons, are going to be coming to the existence. So with this evolution happening, let us see how, I think the recent events, if you find that some of the recent past that we have seen, some of these things are happening in some of our drifting this warfare towards digital warfares. Starting with this Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict, which all of us know that how drones got deployed as autonomous aerial weapons, which is what we have seen. The second is Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is dissemination of 2 Ukraine mechanized battalions in 3 minutes by Russian forces. That's something we have seen. Is a contemporary example of hybrid warfare. And in continuation that we find Saudi Aramco oil processing facilities got attacked by bomb-laden, let's say, drones in September 2019. Is an example of, let's say, how a non-state actors can get involved into warfare. This is a classic example. And also think drone attacks on India, which is also a phenomena which we found that use of low-cost drones by Pakistan and China to deliver munitions and carry out attacks on our security borders has been recently witnessed. And one kind ransom attack and Stuxnet, which is also attacked more than 230,000 computers in 150 countries, which is was about destruction of the Iranian nuclear facility. So these kind of things are also, we have started witnessing it. And the last one is Israel's Hamas conflict, which is also the first artificial intelligence war, which we have witnessed these things in the recent time. I think beside, I think, use of drones, this is getting, I think, prominence when it was first used by US in the war on terror. But I think successfully now we have find that drones result in large-scale deployment and acquisition by China, Russia, and Pakistan. But none of these countries do not want to left behind the race of similar capability. And I think recent Army Day parade held in Delhi was demonstrated India's willingness and its capabilities in this domain also. So this is something that we have seen in the recent events. I think with this recent experiences, we now get into how the future wars will be fought is an area of interesting subject for all of us to look at it. I think defeating the enemy without firing a single bullet is the preferred option. While you find that there are going to be 3 variants or 3 phases of how this is likely to evolve in future, is one is non-contact, non-kinetic, which is a more cyber, economical, and social part. The second is non-contact kinetic one, which is related to electromagnetic thing, nuclear, artillery, munitions, and then missiles. The third one is the contact and kinetic, which is more towards all of above plus armor, infantry, and other forces. I think this is something that we are seeing, that this is how the spectrum of future conflicts will evolve. And probably all the three phases are not going to be the distinct ones, which is very important to understand. Combination of these phases will be conducted concurrently. Hence, all five domains, that is land, air, sea, space, and cyber, would be involved in having such spectrum of future conflicts getting evolved. I think this is somewhere, I think development of advanced capabilities in all the domains would be very, very important. I think this recent pandemic has accelerated the global political and economic rebalancing globally. And we find that there is a brewing for the past couple of decades, which is now coming back. On one hand, China prominence has risen many folds, while on the other hand, Western countries actually to grapple with its external and domestic problems, China is actually exploiting the Western disarray and expanding its global footprint. So this is what we see happening in the current situation. I think some of the recent events are making a shift in the geopolitical scenario. So there is a clear need for self-reliance, Atmanirbhar focus. You find that US withdrawal from Trans-Pacific region, which is partnerships, which is also a recent phenomena you find in the helping in the geopolitical scenarios. And China joined the Regional Economic Comprehensive Partnership, which is RCEP, which is a mega trade bilateral deal, and reached a landmark investment agreement with the European Union. And the US pulled out of WHO, while has China pledged a $2 billion contribution to the organization. So there is a major shifts happening in the geopolitical scenarios. And I think Cold War between China and the US in political, economic, and commercial, technology and military and information domains are actually being witnessed currently. So what is happening in the new system is we find that growing proximity between China, Russia, and Pakistan, which is clearly coming and evident, and a new axis of Turkey, Iran, Russia, Pakistan is on the making. That may disrupt the balance further. And widening wedge between US and EU is also seen in the recent times. Revival of Quad in 2017 with India, US, Japan, and Australia as its members is also seen. Armed conflicts between recently in Afghanistan, ongoing border dispute between Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon on one hand, and on the other hand, India with neighbors on the other hand is going to be. So with these new changes and dynamics happening, new alignments, I think it's very clear that there are no permanent friends and foes. So we need to be technologically advanced to become self-reliant, to safeguard our territorial integrity and interests. So this is going to be very, very important in the current times. So Atmanirbhar Surakshit Bharat is therefore the need and the way forward. I think realizing this important, I just wanted to bring you, all of us keep hearing about 5G technology, which is emerging as the latest technology in terms of connecting all of us together. I think globally we find that this is something that huge investments are actually happening in the 5G market. If you look at in 2020, $53 billion of investment, they expected to grow at a 30% CAGR, and then maybe reach to $250 billion by 2026. All these things are happening because there is an immense demand and the need for having disruptive technologies which can make this communication seamless and on a real-time basis. We also find that nations such as US and Israel and Europe have already invested huge sums of money towards R&D and 5G already. So we find that similar thing happening in the 5G investments in defense, realizing this importance of the network-centric operations, and most of the countries' defense systems have started investing into 5G, which is expected to currently at a 64 million in 2020, is expected to grow to 130 million in the next 5 odd years. This is what we see in the technology side happening, huge investments towards a 5G and ICT, which will result into better connectivity and innovative solutions to address some of these aspects. So the other aspect is about this C4ISR defense global market size. I think this is something which is also considerably increasing in terms of the focus. Currently about $120 billion is expected to $150 billion by next 5 years' time. And we are finding that countries are already heavily investing into C4ISR for a better situational awareness and thinking of OODA loop. So this is something that we find happening in the marketplace. I think as a result of this, if you see, all these things are happening with one thing which is very common, which is across all these countries, is that most of these countries are actually spending a good amount of 5% of their defense budget towards ICT modernization. This is one thing that we found very common across all these countries that we spoke about. However, in India, I think currently the spending, if you take out NFS separately, I think the amount of investments are very, very negligible. So this is an area which requires attention in terms of getting prepared for in terms of digital era. I think this is something that we recommend that at least 3% of a defense budget must go in modernization of ICT infrastructure in line with the global standards, in line with the future conflicts, addressing the future conflicts. So this is going to be very, very important aspect. And I think need for theater command to meet these future challenges is of utmost importance for us. That has been already identified, and because there's no one service would be able to meet the challenges of future. That's very, very clear. Connectivity is either that will act as a catalyst or to achieve jointness, as we spoke, of our defense forces. So that's going to be an important, a network will become a catalyst in making this larger objective achieved. Our ICT modernization philosophy should therefore be tweaked towards at least to achieve the jointness, and there must be considerable investment towards making bringing these technologies and shaping this entire doctrine towards achieving this the larger objective. So having said that, I will now move into a little bit on we spoke about geopolitical scenarios, need for self-reliance, and so therefore there is need for investment in networks and C4ISR and to build NCO capabilities. Let's look at the concept of, let's say, jointness, how we can achieve through jointness in technology. Because we recently hearing about jointness of forces. So how can we achieve this jointness through jointness of technologies that we could look forward? So there is, I think, if you look at it, presently all the services operate in silos with some level of connectivity at the physical and information layer. That's what we see in the current context. However, when it comes to cognitive and social layers, there is no transaction between the services, which is a very serious handicap. That is what we find that we need to definitely look at addressing it. So this is something that we have probably it's a great opportunity for us to look forward and try addressing this jointness in terms of the current situation. So we find that this is something that India should look forward and take it as a part of our jointness program. So what when you talk about jointness through unified network, what it actually means is if you see that India would be having operational, functional, and logistics commands. And the proposed architecture for these entities can be seen on the slide. You're able to see that. Indian Defence Forces would be requiring ICT infrastructure that would include cloud infrastructure, network for the what you call tactical battle, and strategic backbone network and applications. So this is broadly the need of what we look at from ICT infrastructure. One of the most important objectives in future wars would be to shrink this OADA loop through situational awareness and better coordination amongst the services and connectivity between the sensor decision maker to shooter grid. I think that's going to be important, that seamless real-time communication. I think this is where I think new technologies can actually provide unified networks which can actually achieve these objectives of, let's say, how we can solve this important aspect as we go forward. So that's going to be very, very important aspect. And we find that I think currently India will have 3 operational theater commands: North, Eastern, and Peninsular. 1 functional theater command, which is air defense, and 1 more maybe on logistics. So there is a need to look at jointness of technologies, getting this unified network, which will improve this overall putting the entire things together. This is where I think latest technologies, including some of us, can actually help achieving this objective. So I'll just move into some of the, just to sum up that what are the, in the current scenario, what are the challenges that we see. So one thing is that we find that we do have a very robust, I would say that scalable agile backbone, which is through, whether it is for network for Spectrum, AFNet, and NCS in place. This is absolutely is there. However, due to their role and architecture, interconnectivity, mobility, and remains so a matter of concern. So there is amongst all these agile backbone connectivity. So there is I think we just need to look at the interconnectivity part. So that's something which is an area which could be improved. And second is that during the active hostilities in future wars, each entity in the TBA would be expected to be a smart networked entity. So that's very important in digital wars. Creating networks in forward areas with these capabilities during peacetime and using dual use technologies would be definitely an important aspect to put us into a better position. We don't have a communication system for cutting edge tactical battle area, which is TCS 2000, is yet to see the light of the day. Absence of a tactical battle communication system is a serious handicap, I believe, which needs to be addressed on priority. The existing MCCS, which is a mobile cellular communication network, has already outlived its intended life and needs to be upgraded with a 5G network on priority. This is something that we've seen that in line with the global standards, global benchmarks. This is an important priority for all of us. Deploying 5G, 4G private LTE networks in northern and I would say eastern theaters would be essential because the connectivity is not very great in these areas, and to connect the millions of unmanned ground sensors and sensor grid, so that the digital and besides providing connectivity to our forces, we can actually take a real-time decision making using this. Also, I think the Indian Army needs to upgrade, replace anti-inflammatory obstacle systems, which is of 2005 vintage by Smart Digital Frontiers. Every year we spend approximately 100 crores in maintaining this system. So there is a need to look at replacing this system. The other aspect is about Smart Digital Frontiers with their user-friendly whether unmanned ground-based systems which are drone, anti-drone capabilities, would be a game changer in providing surveillance, situational awareness, as well as reduction in casualties and better, I would say, response rate to the threats. This is going to be so. I think industry at large is definitely have the indigenous technology, which is Atmanirbhar based. To capability, we have capabilities to build these digital frontiers, upgrade our MCCS networks in the country, in creating this 5G networks for the tactical battle areas. I think one of the biggest, I would say that impediments in ICT modernization into our defense services forces has been paucity of the fund. So hence we've been saying that a separate allocation of an ICT budget, allocation of ICT funds within the defense budget would make this future, as we are speaking, possible, and with the digital technologies being adopted more and more. So I would like to bring few recommendations as we discussed to the recent in the last few minutes about to the Army leadership for consideration. First and foremost is this prioritization of ICT modernization, which is a very, very important aspect. And this is something that is of paramount importance for achieving joint needs and situational awareness and shrinking of the OAD loop. So this is one important aspect that we would bring it to the recommendation of the Army leadership for consideration. Second is that, as I said earlier, that dedicated non-lapsable ICT modernization budget, at least a minimum of 3% of the defense budget for achieving this, bringing all these disruptive technologies on, and which is going to be very, very essential. This is a second recommendation. And third is about there is an urgent need for creating digital frontiers for our northern and eastern theaters. And Indian companies, including STL, has capabilities towards jointly working with the Army in creating this digital frontiers, which is Atmanirbhar Indian-made technologies. And the fourth recommendation is about we spoke about upgrading this MCCS network with the latest cutting-edge technologies and 4G and 5G. This is another recommendation that we bring forward to the leadership for consideration. I think the fifth is important is that there is a need to create innovative solutions like tethering drones with EW capabilities. So this is something that the current context is very, very very important in the current situation. So this is something that we also look at recommending it. The sixth recommendation would be communication system for tactical battle area, which should preferably be based on 5G and beyond technology. This is something, as the technology is evolving, we would suggest that we, as a part of Doctrine and Strategy, this entire aspect should be redebated in terms of what should be communication system for the tactical battle area, which is using the latest cutting edge technologies. And I think on the last recommendation is about notification of a policy on a telecom ducts along all the border roads, because I believe most of our border posts today are required to be strengthened on the communication. I think putting up an optical fiber network along the border roads could actually make this entire network 5G achievable, and then as well as connectivity will improve. So that's about what I wanted to talk about, the interesting subject on the digital era combat, which is the criticality and its reliance in the current context.